Picture this with me. It's a freezing cold February morning in 1869. The thick old stones of Westminster Abbey are echoing with the clang of pickaxes and the muffled grunts of workers digging deep beneath the marble floor. Shadows flicker wildly under the orange glow of torches as Dean Arthur Stanley leans forward over a newly opened hole in the ground. He's holding architectural drawings in one hand, burial records in the other, and neither of them match up. Somewhere below him, hidden in this dark labyrinth of vaults, lies the lost tomb of King James I. But what Stanley is about to uncover isn't just about one missing king. What he finds will peel back centuries of royal secrets. And I mean the kind of secrets that crawl under your skin and stick with you long after the video ends. Before we go any deeper into this journey, a quick reminder. If you love discovering the hidden, uncomfortable truths of history, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below with where you're tuning in from. It always blows my mind that we're uncovering these long-buried stories together, across countries, continents, and time zones. Alright, let's rewind a bit, because this story doesn't actually begin in 1869. To understand what was really going on down in those tombs, we have to go back more than 250 years earlier, to a chilly March morning in 1603. We're at Richmond Palace. Queen Elizabeth I, once the most powerful woman in Europe, the queen who defeated the Spanish Armada and dazzled diplomats with her razor-sharp wit, is now barely hanging on. She hasn't spoken in days. For 4 nights, she refused to lie down, just stood silently in her room, sometimes for 15 hours straight. Her ladies-in-waiting had to line the floor with cushions because they knew the second she collapsed, it would be the beginning of the end. And they were right. What kind of terror must it take to be so afraid of rest that you physically refuse to lie down? That's the kind of psychological unraveling Elizabeth was going through. Her body was falling apart. Rotting teeth, hair loss, foul odor from weeks of refusing to bathe. The same courtiers who once scrambled to get near her were now keeping their distance. Whispers filled the palace halls. Omens, strange sights. Elizabeth Southwell, one of her attendants, claimed the queen was haunted by ghostly visions of herself. And one day, a playing card with a nail through the center appeared on her chair. Imagine how that must have felt to a woman who believed God himself had chosen her to rule. Was it a threat? A curse? A message? On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth finally died. But what happened next would raise eyebrows for centuries. Her closest attendants refused to allow a postmortem. Officially, they said it was to protect her image as the Virgin Queen. But others believed they were hiding something. Something that couldn't be allowed to leave that room. Was it to preserve myth, or to conceal something far more sinister? A month later, on April 28th, London came to a standstill for her funeral. Thousands lined the streets as a hearse draped in black velvet carried her coffin from Whitehall to Westminster Abbey. On top of that coffin, a lifelike effigy of the Queen, scepter in hand, crown on her head, dressed in royal robes. The likeness was so realistic that people gasped. Some even wept aloud. It was as if Elizabeth were right there, refusing to let go of power, even in death. Her body, sealed inside a lead coffin, standard for royals, was first buried in the vault of her grandfather, Henry VIII. Lead was supposed to protect her body, lock in the scent, and keep everything well neat. But as we'll see later, lead coffins have their own dark side. Fast forward just 3 years. It's 1606, and King James I, the same man who succeeded Elizabeth, decides to move her remains. Not just anywhere, but right into the tomb of her half-sister, Mary. That's right, Bloody Mary, the Catholic queen who once burned Protestants at the stake. The two sisters had spent their lives at odds, representing different faiths, different visions for England. And now, James literally stacked Elizabeth's coffin on top of Mary's, in a cramped vault beneath a shiny new marble monument. The symbolism? Uncomfortable, to say the least. Mary, once queen in her own right, was reduced to a historical footnote, buried beneath her sister's glory. James commissioned a white tomb with Elizabeth's image carved in marble, complete with an inscription celebrating her reign. Mary's name? Barely mentioned. The official tomb inscription tried to soften the blow. Partners in throne and grave, here we sleep. Sounds poetic, right? But the reality was grim. A heavy lead coffin weighing hundreds of pounds sat directly on top of another one for over 260 years. Imagine the pressure. Literally. One queen's corpse slowly crushing the other. By the 1860s, historians were starting to realize they had a problem. James I's own tomb had gone missing, and Westminster's burial records were a mess, full of contradictions, lost diagrams, and outdated maps. So Dean Stanley stepped in, with permission from none other than Queen Victoria, to begin a full archaeological survey of the Abbey's vaults. And that's how the hunt began. On February 11, 1869, Stanley and his team cracked open the vault beneath the Henry VII Chapel. That date, by the way, was no accident. It was the anniversary of Elizabeth of York's death in 1503, exactly 366 years earlier. Whether it was a symbolic tribute or pure coincidence, we don't know. But what Stanley found was anything but ordinary. In the torchlight, two lead coffins appeared, stacked one on top of the other. Elizabeth's on top, large and elaborately molded in the shape of a human body. Below, Mary's smaller, simpler casket, both coated in centuries of greenish tarnish. And on the lid of Elizabeth's coffin, carvings, the Tudor rose, her initials, dates. But that wasn't all. Etched into the lead was something else. Something unexpected. The name John Ware and the date 1645. Who was John Ware? Was he a workman? A grave robber? A curious visitor during England's Civil War? No one knows. But the graffiti proves something chilling. These royal vaults weren't nearly as secure as we thought. That leads us to a disturbing question. What else might have happened down there? Let's pause for a second and think about what Dean Arthur Stanley and his team had just uncovered. Two royal coffins. One massive and elaborate, shaped like a human form, perched right on top of another. Elizabeth's eyes resting on her half-sister Mary's. That visual alone is striking. But now imagine you're down there in that tight, torchlit vault, surrounded by the stale air of centuries and the heavy silence of the dead. Then your eye catches something strange, etched into the lead surface of the Queen's coffin. A name, John Ware, and a date, 1645. That's over 40 years after Elizabeth's burial. So, someone had been down there, and they'd left their mark on a royal coffin. Why? Were they part of a reburial? A secret inspection? A thief? We'll probably never know. But what we do know is this: Elizabeth's tomb and others like it were not sacred, untouchable relics. They were visited. They were vulnerable. And here's where things get even more unsettling. Let's talk about lead coffins. Royals were buried in them because they were thought to preserve the body better, sealing everything in air, moisture, and, well, odor. But here's the thing. When a body decomposes in a completely sealed environment, especially in metal, it produces gas. We're talking about methane, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, you name it. These gases don't just vanish. In wooden coffins, they can escape over time. In lead coffins, they're trapped. That pressure builds. And in some cases, especially after centuries, it causes the coffin to swell. Even explode. Yeah, explode. One account from Elizabeth Southwell, a lady in waiting, claimed that Elizabeth's body was so filled with noxious vapors that it ruptured the lead coffin. Now, some historians dismiss Southwell as unreliable, but the science actually checks out. The same thing has been recorded in other royal tombs. When Edward Ivy's coffin was opened in Windsor, parts of his body were found submerged in a dark liquid, a gruesome mix of decomposed flesh and the remains of the wooden interior. Lead coffins weren't a solution. They were pressure cookers. And remember, Elizabeth's coffin was enormous. Modern royal lead-lined coffins can weigh over 500 pounds, easily requiring 8 pallbearers. So now imagine that monstrous weight pressing down on Mary's coffin underneath for more than 260 years. What started as a grand royal statement, a queen above her rivals, became a literal crushing of one sister by another. But this wasn't an isolated case. Elizabeth and Mary's vault is part of a much wider, much darker tradition. the disturbing ways Britain's monarchy has treated the remains of its own rulers. Take King Edward the Confessor, for example. His body was moved and unwrapped by Henry II in the year 1163, out of curiosity. Edward had been dead for over a century, yet they found him miraculously intact, his beard still white and his robes still shining. So what did Henry do? He took Edward's pilgrim ring as a souvenir and repurposed the cloth of gold that had wrapped the king into liturgical garments, robes for the clergy. And then there's Duke Humphrey of Gloucester. He was buried at St. Albans Abbey, but women used to visit his tomb, scoop out embalming fluid, and rub it on their faces because they believed it could cure wrinkles. Local monks made a tidy profit selling it in thimbles. Eventually, when the liquid ran dry, people took his hair, his nails, until all that remained were a few bones and an empty casket. This wasn't uncommon. In 1784, at St. Mary's Church in Berry Street, Edmonds, workers opened the coffin of Mary Tudor, Elizabeth's aunt, for no real reason. And what did they do? They took samples of her hair, 2 feet long, golden and soft, and passed it around. Then there's the story of Richard II. In 1871, his tomb was opened for restoration. His skeleton was mostly intact, but some relics were taken. Where did they end up? In a cigarette box, sitting in the basement of the National Portrait Gallery for decades. The box held fragments of wood, fabric from his clothing, even part of his glove. A cigarette box, containing pieces of a king. If that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about how the powerful are treated after death, I don't know what does. And if you think that's the end of it, guess again. There's the tale of Catherine of Valois, wife of Henry V. For centuries, her corpse was literally displayed inside Westminster Abbey. Tourists could pay a small fee to see her body in a half-open coffin. The Abbey staff turned her into a morbid attraction. She was eventually reburied, but not before thousands of people had gawked at her remains. All of this paints a picture that's hard to ignore. In life, these monarchs were feared, respected, glorified. In death, they became trophies, curiosities, props. Even Elizabeth I wasn't spared. Above her vault, James I had a monument erected that showed her draped in glory. The sculpture had her in royal robes, clutching a scepter, wearing a crown. Later illustrations from the early 1600s show her effigy painted in vibrant colors: crimson robe, gilded lions, a rosy complexion. It was a lie, a beautiful, deliberate lie. The real Elizabeth, in the vault below, was long dead, encased in lead, slowly decomposing under the weight of her own legacy, both figuratively and literally. And remember, her story didn't end there. In 1975, yes, almost 400 years after her death, someone decided her effigy needed a little more flair. So they added a gold collar with a pendant to make her look more complete. Even in death, she was being dressed up for the public. Think about that. Elizabeth had fought her whole life to be more than just an image. She defied expectations, rejected marriage, ruled alone. But in the end, all people cared about was how she looked on the surface. Even in a stone tomb. And today, we're still telling her story, still peeking into her grave, still curious. In Part 3, we'll explore what it would be like to descend into that vault today, what's left of the coffins, the lead, the bones, and what this entire macabre tale says about us. So now imagine this. You're standing in Westminster Abbey. The air smells faintly of old stone and polished wood. Tourists shuffle quietly past grand tombs, staring up at marble effigies, reading brass plaques. You walk over to Henry VII's chapel, past the gilded screens and ornate carvings. Beneath your feet, unknown to most, is a dark, cramped vault. And inside it, Elizabeth I, still in her lead coffin, still stacked on top of her half-sister Mary. After more than 400 years, their remains are still down there, encased in corroding metal, slowly breaking down under the weight of time and each other. Lead, you see, is soft, and time is relentless. The inscriptions that Dean Stanley once documented, the Tudor rose, the initials, the dates, they might still be visible, etched like a final whisper from the dead. And John Ware's graffiti from 1645? Yeah, that's probably still there too. A centuries-old reminder that even the graves of queens aren't truly sacred. Now let's be honest. Elizabeth's story should have ended in 1603. Or maybe 1606 when her coffin was moved. But it didn't. We kept bringing her back. Dean Stanley's vault opening in 1869. The jewelry update in 1975. This video right now. We keep unsealing her tomb. Not physically, at least not anymore, but symbolically. Over and over. And that begs the question, why? Why are we still so obsessed with her story? With her corpse? With the hidden truths about her death and burial? Part of it is curiosity. Sure, it's fascinating. It's grotesque. It's real-life Gothic horror. But there's something deeper going on here. Elizabeth's story forces us to confront a truth we don't like to think about. Even the greatest, most powerful figures in history, people who ruled nations, fought wars, shaped continents, they end up just like the rest of us. A decomposing body in a box. No amount of royal ceremony, no scepter or crown, no polished monument or painted effigy can change that. Elizabeth ruled for 44 years. She controlled armies. She terrified kings. She never married, never submitted. She once declared, "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." And yet, in the end, even that heart and stomach succumb to the same biology as everyone else. Gases, decay, silence. What's more disturbing is how little respect we've shown her in death, how we've treated her body, and the bodies of countless other royals, as tools, props, artifacts. James I stacking her above Mary wasn't just a burial decision. It was a political move, a message, a literal pecking order in stone and lead. And what about the people who carved their names into her coffin? Or the souvenir hunters who took Richard II's glove? Or the tourists who paid to peek at Catherine of Valois' corpse like it was some haunted attraction? At every step we see a pattern. The dead don't get to rest. Not when they're famous. Not when they're useful. Even today, as we tell her story again, we have to ask ourselves, are we honoring her memory? Or consuming it? Because here's the real horror story. It's not that Elizabeth's coffin might have exploded. Not that she was stacked on her sister. Not that her corpse was poked and prodded and examined. It's that we never let her be. We never let her just die. We need her. As a symbol. As a cautionary tale. As a ghost of power past. We dress her up. We tear her down. We whisper about her secrets. We argue about her virginity. We stare at her effigy and pretend the myth is the truth. All while her real body, rotting, weighty, pressed into the lead, slowly collapses under the gravity of time. In that way, Elizabeth's tomb isn't just a royal resting place. It's a mirror. It reflects how we treat our heroes, our icons, how we chase perfection and legacy, only to devour them when they're gone. She ruled without a husband. She refused to be defined by men. She built a nation that would dominate the world. But in the end, she became part of a grotesque monument. One body crushing another, both forgotten beneath layers of stone and history and lies. As you walk through Westminster Abbey, and you look up at that grand marble statue of Elizabeth, serene, powerful, untouchable. Remember this, that statue is just a mask. The truth is below. In a vault no one sees, in a coffin few remember, rests a woman who changed the world, but could not escape it. A woman who lived alone, and now lies in the most permanent of embraces, with the sister she feared and the legacy she never truly controlled. Because death doesn't care about thrones. And time always wins. And maybe that's the final lesson from Elizabeth's grave. Not that power fades, but that we, the living, never really learn to let go. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the dark. If the story struck a nerve, share it with someone. Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And as always, subscribe if you want more stories that make history feel unsettlingly real. Until next time, walk softly. The past is never quite as buried as we think.